James lived in an apartment on the 12th floor of a tall, aging building in the heart of the city. He ran a small shop on the ground floor, selling trinkets and souvenirs to tourists. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. Every evening after closing the shop, his helper Raj would stay behind to clean up while James headed home. But one day, Raj didn't show up. No call, no explanation. James had no choice but to clean the shop himself. By the time he finished, it was nearly midnight. Exhausted, James locked up and made his way to the apartment building. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual hum of the city replaced by an unsettling silence. When he reached the building, he pressed the button for the elevator and waited. Nothing happened. He pressed it again, harder this time. But it remained lifeless. "Damn it," James muttered under his breath. He glanced at the staircase door. The thought of climbing 12 floors after such a long day made his leg ache, but he had no other choice. The staircase was dimly lit, the fluorescent light flickering weakly. James began his ascent, his footsteps echoing loudly in the empty space. By the time he reached the second floor, he started to feel uneasy. The air seemed heavier, pressing down on him. He shook off the feeling, blaming his exhaustion. By then, he heard it, a faint sound like footsteps behind him. He stopped and turned around, but there was no one there. The staircase was empty. He continued climbing, his pace quickening. The sound came again, louder this time. He spun around, his heart racing, but still there was nothing. By the 5th floor, James was sweating. The footsteps were unmistakable now, keeping pace with him. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, but the fear was real. He started running, taking the steps 2 at a time, but the footsteps matched his speed. It felt as if whatever was following him was toying with him. When he reached the 7th floor, the crying started. A soft, mournful sound like a child weeping in the dark. James froze, his breath catching in his throat. The cry gave laughter, echoing through the staircase, but there was no one in sight. Then, between the sobs, he heard whispers, faint, fragmented words that sent chills down his spine. "Who's there?" James called out, his voice trembling. No answer. Just the crying and the whispering growing louder with every step he took. He forced himself to keep moving, his legs burning with effort. The 10th floor. He was so close. But as he climbed, the crying stopped, replaced by laughter. Low and guttural, like the sound of someone who had forgotten how to laugh properly. James' heart pounded in his chest. He could see the door to the 12th floor now, just a few more steps away. That's when he heard the voice. James! It was a whisper, soft and pleading, yet it felt like it was right next to his ear. He spun around, but there was nothing. Just the empty staircase and the flickering light. Panicked, he bolted up the last flight of stairs, fumbling with his keys as he reached his apartment door. His hands shook so badly he could barely fit the key into the lock. Finally, the door clicked open. He rushed inside and slammed it shut, locking it behind him. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. But then, the lights in his apartment flickered on and off. The water taps in the kitchen turned on by themselves, spilling water onto the floor. James ran to the door, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked, trapped from the inside. The voice came again. James, I like you so much. Please come to me. His breath hitched. He could see a shadow moving in the dim light. It's from shifting. His breath hitched. He could see a shadow moving in the dim light. Its form shifting, unnatural. It laughed, a deep, eerie sound that sent ice through his veins. Terrified, James dashed to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. Stay away from me, he shouted, his voice shaking. I'll kill you if you come closer. The laughter only grew louder, more twisted. I like you, James. I'm alone. Come to me. Something cold wrapped around his wrist. An invisible force controlling his hand. The knife slowly turned towards his own neck. His body trembled as he struggled against it, but it was too strong. Please, no, no, were James' last words. The next morning, a neighbor passing by noticed a dark stain seeping from under James' door. Alarmed, he called the police. When they arrived and forced the door open, they found James lying on the floor, lifeless, a deep wound in his neck. The verdict was clear: suicide. But in the dim apartment, the shadow lingered, waiting for the next lonely soul to climb the stairs.